Move the motion, and I will then call the Minister to respond. I remind other members that they may only make a speech with prior permission from the member in charge of the debate and the Minister. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention, for 30 minutes. Order. Chris Murray to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Dowden. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I have called this debate because we are at an important and promising moment in the UK-France relationship. It has been a bumpy few years. Brexit and its fallout placed the relationship under real strain. A couple of years ago, we had a Prime Minister unclear on whether the French President was friend or foe. But those days are behind us, and 6 months on from an extremely successful state visit and UK-France summit, the relationship is back on track. This, therefore, is the right moment for Parliament to recognise that fact and take stock of how the relationship can serve both countries better. This relationship matters, not just for diplomatic niceties, but because so many of this government's core objectives depend on it. Our security, our borders, our energy system, our economic growth and our standing in the world. The UK-France relationship is not new. It is one of the longest continuous diplomatic relationships in the world. I note that this year marks 1,000 years since the birth of William the Conqueror. And as a Scot, I note with pride that last year was the 730th anniversary of the Old Alliance, which Charles de Gaulle called the oldest alliance in the world, which I was pleased to celebrate at St Giles Cathedral in my constituency, along with the French community in Edinburgh. Seen in that perspective, the difficulties of the past decade are no more than bumps in the road. But they were real bumps, and it matters that we now mark their passing and recognise the relationship is moving forward with purpose. Let me begin with defence and security. The UK and France are Europe's two nuclear powers and its two permanent members of the UN Security Council. Together, we account for roughly 40% of Europe's defence spending and around half the continent's military research and technology investment. 6 months on from the state visit, from Lancaster House 2.0 and from the Entente Industrielle, our defence sectors, both public and private, are more deeply intertwined than ever. Our armed forces, our intelligence services and our defence industries operate not just in parallel but in partnership. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
And just when you mentioned about the relationship between England, the UK and France in relation, we've fought many battles against each other, but we always remember the last two battles we fought them together in taking on fascism across the world as it is. But does the honourable member not agree that the historic connection with France has always been perhaps one of friction, but it can still be a symbiotic relationship, has always existed, which must be built upon in terms of cross-channel trade, relationships, but also in terms of immigration crossings? I think we have to address that issue, if you don't mind, and the French need to resolve that in response and coordination with our national security requirements, the very thing that the honourable gentleman is reminding us all of in his last few words. Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and he's right that strategically our interests are aligned, even when there are key issues. And I'm going to come on to the issue about migration in just a second. Yes, I will give way.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a powerful speech which highlights his real love and expertise of this subject. But one of our greatest threats to our shared security is from Russian sub-threshold activity, which could well escalate further later this year. I've been working through the Franco-British Council, an agreement that something that we both share together with RUSI and the Institut Montaigne, on ways that the whole of both our governments could work more effectively against this threat, including through joint National Security Council meetings.
I'm sorry, it's not a short speech. I'm sorry about that. Chris Evans, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree entirely with the point my honourable friend is making. Like him, I've worked a lot with the Franco-British Council, and he's right that the sort of strategic autonomy of Europe and the European ability to act collectively and in coalitions of the willing, an issue I will come on to in a second, is really important given the changing geopolitical situation that we clearly face.
Really give way.
I will give way.
Very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and he will of course be aware that both of our nations are subject currently to disinformation online. We're also facing the challenges from AI as well as its promise. So would he agree with me that we need to be continuing the work from the Bletchley Summit and from the Paris Summit on AI and really intensifying this work on technology into the future?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. Both the UK and France have substantial military technology sectors that both are critical for our own security, but also for the rules-based international order that the relationship between the two countries props up. And absolutely, the new technologies, both in terms of AI, but also in terms of just military hardware and kit, we need the rules-based international order. Liberals in the world need the UK and France at the forefront, and our technology and defence industries working with our political objectives to achieve that, which I think is exactly the point my other honourable friend was about to make. And it sort of takes me back, actually, takes me to exactly the point I was about to make in my speech, which is at the UK-France summit last year, the Prime Minister and President Macron reaffirmed the Northwood Declaration from 1995, which is about our nuclear posture and our shared nuclear objectives, nuclear weapons objectives, which said, quote, "We do not see a situation arising in which the vital interest of either France or the UK would be threatened without the vital interests of the other also being threatened." There are actually not many countries in the world we could say that so boldly and so clearly of. In other words, what we are saying is British security is French security, and French security is British security. And actually, despite all the bumps in the road, that strategic truth endures. Yes, I will give way.
I am very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. My constituency of Surrey Heath was the home to the Free French Forces during the Second World War, and I think that's representative of the kind of security relationship we've had in the past. And can I just urge the government, maybe through the honourable gentleman, in the spirit of strategic futures, to get back around the table and to ensure that we have a safe and secure, safe deal to allow the UK to take part in common European defence.
Well said.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and for the history of his constituency on this important issue. And obviously the safe issue is, I know, something the government and actors in both France and the UK are working quite deeply on. Obviously we're not in it now, but we can still hope for the future. And I think that the point about UK-France relations is not just that it's good for British security or that our relationship is good for French security, is that it's actually good for world security. And nowhere is that clearer than in Ukraine. So, for example, the Storm Shadow long-range missile, developed by MBDA, a joint Franco-British company, has been one of the most effective weapons supplied to Ukraine in repelling Russia's invasion. And the UK and France, it's not just kit, it's also political leadership. The UK and France have been at the heart of the coalition of the willing, convening 35 countries to support Ukraine's security, including last week's incredibly significant announcement that both countries are prepared to contribute ground forces in support of a future peace settlement. So at a time of a change in strategic posture in the United States, if I can put it like that, of Russian aggression in Europe, of the rise of China, of crises in the Middle East and in South America, it is no small thing that Britain and France stand shoulder to shoulder in defence of the rules-based international order.
On that point,
yes, I will give way.
I'm very grateful to him, and it's right that we recognise that through the ups and downs in our two countries' relationships, both our countries' histories and cultures interacting have made our countries what they are today. But relationships take work, and I don't think he's going to have to declare an interest in this as a former distinguished diplomat in Paris. But will he join me in paying tribute, as I hope the Minister will subsequently, to the fantastic diplomatic team we have in our Paris embassy, and indeed that the French government have in their embassy here in London, building and strengthening that relationship between our two countries, often behind the scenes?
thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I will firstly declare an interest as former having worked at the UK Embassy in Paris. The quality has improved a lot since I left, and completely agree with both the UK staff in the UK in France, both in Paris and in the consulates, and the French staff here in the UK, both in the Embassy in London and in the consulates, including the consulate in Edinburgh in my constituency, do fantastic work, both in smoothing the relationship and stopping crises erupting, which is so important, and also, of course, supporting nationals in the two countries who do fantastic work. And that is so important because, remember, tourism and business relationships, as well as political relationships, are what make this relationship so important to the country. I think you were first here.
Thank you, gentleman, for giving way. He mentioned tourism, and I just wanted to see if he had any thoughts about the fantastic work that organisations like Harrogate International Partnerships do when it comes to town twinning, which obviously we saw large setups off the back of World War II, and the educational, cultural and tourism exchange that such organisations and their work can do to deepen the French-UK relationship.
I think the honourable gentleman makes a really important point. You know, speaking as a MP whose constituency is a tourist centre, and we welcome people from across the world, but particularly from France, actually, and they contribute so much. And I know that so many businesses in my own constituency are both dependent on tourism from France, but also find it difficult to navigate. So the organisations that have helped mitigate those bumps in the road that we found are really the backbone of the economy in places like Edinburgh and Harrogate. So, of course, I pay tribute to them. Yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and for securing this debate, in fact. And on the position of cultural relations, he may not be aware, but the Festival Interceltique de l'Orient, which celebrates Celtic identity so strongly felt in both regions of the UK and in Brittany, will this year focus on Cornish identity. Does he agree with me that cultural enterprises play a vital role in strengthening the close relationships between the UK and France, alongside other fundamentals such as youth engagement, particularly with the Erasmus Plus scheme?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I didn't know that the Festival de l'Orient was focusing on Cornwall this year, but I've got another interest to declare, because I remember going to that festival as a schoolboy, and it was one of the things that inculcated a Scottish person's love of French culture and Celtic culture. So I absolutely do know the importance of what he's talking about, so I thank him for raising it. I'll give one. Yes, of course.
Thank you so much. I'm most grateful to the Honourable for giving way and for calling this debate. And when we talk about smoothing the relationship, will my honourable friend join me in welcoming the new entente amicale between the UK and France? And will he also join me in recognising how this is strengthened by the 11 French-English bilingual schools we have in our country, such as the tremendous Fulham Bilingual in my own constituency, which is a partnership between the French Lycée and the local Holy Cross School, and which is a living, breathing symbol of the entente amicale in action. Actually, will he proclaim with me, Vive l'école bilingue de Fulham?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. He's absolutely right. We've had the entente cordiale, the entente industrielle, which I referred to earlier, and the entente amicale with bilingual schools do a huge role in both allowing children to understand each other's cultures, but also live both sides of their identity, which in the 21st century is really important. And I think the French model is something we should be looking at for wider communities in the UK, to allow people to be more comfortable in their identities. And I will, of course, cry, Vive les écoles bilingues
De Fulham.
De Fulham. Sorry, I didn't quite follow there.
Merci.
But absolutely. If there are no further interventions on those issues, I'll just turn on to how other components of the UK-France relationship are critical to the government's objectives. So not just culturally and in communities, as those interventions have suggested, or in terms of security and geopolitics, as I was outlining earlier, but actually the UK-France relationship is central to some of the government's political domestic priorities, including restoring control to our migration system. So illegal immigration is, as we all know, by definition, a transnational problem, and thus requires a transnational solution and international cooperation. Now, after Brexit, we left behind instruments like Dublin, but also SIS2 and PRUM and others, And this, therefore, makes bilateral cooperation with the French so important. When I visited northern France with the Home Affairs Select Committee last month, I saw the scale and the seriousness of the effort underway by French police, soldiers and reservists in order to disrupt the organised crime gangs, to work on maritime interceptions, to work on the one-in, one-out pilot, to reach out to migrants and change their calculus of their decision-making, and to create new, safer routes in the future. None of those objectives can succeed without work with the French, and none of it will be sustained without a genuine partnership between our law enforcement agencies, our border forces and political leaders. Every Labour MP knows that we were elected on a promise to clean up the mess left on immigration. The public will not forgive us if we fail. The UK-France relationship, I argue, is critical to meeting that public expectation, and woe betide us if we do not. Yes, I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We have a big, thriving French community in Hampstead and Highgate who have said to me that they're concerned that the UK is becoming a high-risk destination for French nationals who want to live and work here because of the issues around ILR. And French parents are particularly concerned locally about having different settlement timelines to their partners because of childcare responsibilities, as it reduces their salary threshold. So could I ask my honourable friend, does he think the government should take into consideration childcare responsibility when it reforms the ILR situation for French nationals in our country?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention because she's making a really important point. The immigration system, as I'm arguing here, does need reform and does need to meet the public expectations, but it needs to happen in a way that works for public expectations, works for the economy, and works for families and individuals and takes cognizance of the fact that these are people's lives. I do believe that that is utterly possible, and I think it is possible within the parameters the Home Secretary has set out, but we will need to see what the detail of that policy looks like, and like her, I will be watching closely to see that it meets the objectives that she's just set. I would argue that our relationship with France is going to be critical in managing the public's expectations on immigration, but I would actually argue that it goes even further than that. Because beyond the domestic political imperative of getting a grip on immigration, there is something bigger and a challenge both our countries face. Because a dysfunctional immigration system fuels anger and distrust, and that fuels the populist right, both in Britain and in France. As two countries facing the challenge, it is important that we work together and tackle that to make sure that we deal with that rise of populism that we both face. And also, I would argue the French relationship is critical in some of the government's economic objectives, not just because France is our fifth biggest trading partner and our third largest services sector market. Over £100 billion of trade is done with France every year, nor because London is the fourth biggest French city, and my honourable friend's constituency must be one of the Frenchest that you get. But actually, even if you think about just our energy sector, and it illustrates a vignette of our relationship with France. The transition to clean energy is the defining economic public policy challenge of our age. France is one of the biggest investors in Britain's nuclear sector. EDF is central to the delivery of Hinkley Point and Sizewell C. French engineering, finance and expertise will be indispensable to achieving this government's clean energy mission. This relationship is critical here. But the relationship goes further than that. It's not just commercial or economic, it is radical. Britain and France were among the first countries to industrialise. We were also major colonial powers, and our global footprint still shapes the world today with the Francophonie and the Commonwealth. That gives us a shared responsibility to lead on climate change, not only to decarbonise our economies, but to show that a prosperous net zero society is possible. I want to say something else about the future of the relationship. There are those of us who will want to look back nostalgically to the days that we sat together in the European Union. And I know that many people do lament the Brexit vote. Some of them are outside singing in Parliament Square. But nostalgia is a poor basis for foreign policy. hankering for a golden past that never really existed is not the way to move forward. I actually argue that was one of the fundamental problems behind Brexit. What matters not is the architecture of the institutions, but the reality of the cooperation. So I strongly welcome the government's progress in resetting relationships with the EU, particularly on dynamic alignment on food and energy, on working together on shared objectives like migration and Ukraine and the geopolitical challenges that we face, but also to building the relationships between people, which several members have raised here. Yes, I will.
I'm loath to interrupt such an excellent speech, but just on that very point, does he not agree that we all here have a role to play as members of Parliament in forging those relationships with our contemporaries in the Assemblée Nationale? And can I also congratulate him in that vein on becoming a Vice Chair of the APPG?
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for that. I think he's absolutely right that relationships between political leaders are critical to understanding, to developing the relationship between the nations, and I really look forward to the work we'll be doing on the APPG in that regard. I really welcome the return of the Erasmus Plus and the Youth Experience Scheme. I studied in France under Erasmus, and it changed my life. It has been heartbreaking that my own young constituents have not had that opportunity, and I'm really pleased the government is now restoring that. And as my friends referred to, programmes like the Franco-British Young Leaders, of which I am part of this year's cohort, do vital work in building the networks of trust across politics, business and civil society. This year also, as a result of the state visit, we will culturally have a huge Franco-British moment when the Bayeux Tapestry comes to the British Museum later this year. It will probably be its exhibition of the decade. This relationship is not abstract. It is human, it is cultural, it is strategic and it is economic all at once. It's one of the country's closest relationships. Yes, I will give way.
I'll try and be sufficiently brief this time. The French have enjoyed or have a very tight-knit strategic culture, something that we don't understand, but it centres on European autonomy and being able to protect our interests as Europeans. Would my honourable friend agree that this strategic culture is something that we must relearn post our Suez lessons and should shape our outlooks going forward?
2 minutes past 4 and the Minister's got to speak, so I'd be grateful if he could start to wind up if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was on the point of winding up there, so don't worry. I think my honourable friend has made an excellent point, and he and I could spend hours discussing the government architecture distinctions between the UK, France and actually Scotland. I would argue Scotland makes different mistakes in terms of its government structures in comparison with the French. I think that the key point is this: given there are such similarities both in our challenges and in our objectives, that we can learn a lot from each other about what kind of architecture works and doesn't in each situation. The compare and contrast between cultures and structures is really how you drive forward change, and I think there's a lot of things the UK could learn from France and vice versa. So I will sum up just by saying the UK relationship with France is finally back on track. We are no longer indulging in symbolism, but we are focusing on something fundamental, that in an unstable world, we are closer together than we are separate, and that our future security, prosperity and global influence depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Edinburgh East and Musselburgh, for securing this debate. It's a particular pleasure, as it always is in this place, to hear different constituencies' history with France. My own constituency's history with France is fighting a moderately successful battle to prevent the invasion of England by France, defended by the suspiciously French-named Nicolas de la Hoye, who was then the Constable of Lincoln Castle. It was a successful but bloody affair, so I'm glad that my honourable friend and so many others have carried off their commentary about their historical links with our neighbour over the channel with rather more elan than Lincoln can manage. I'm grateful for the contributions, of course, of other honourable members and will endeavour to respond to the points raised. I'm sure the Minister for Europe would have been very glad to be here. He is, as you know, conducting a general debate about Ukraine in the main chamber today. We, of course, have a deep shared history with France, not just in combat, but in so many other things: values, trade, cultural links and partnerships on the international stage, in NATO, G7, the United Nations and beyond. The relationship remains vibrant, ambitious and essential. As my honourable friend said so graciously, since this government has come to power, we've prioritised resetting and deepening relations with our European partners to deliver tangible benefits for our security, people and economy, and France is central to that, even in Lincoln. As permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and Europe's leading defence and only nuclear powers, our countries share responsibility for international peace and security. We're at the forefront of efforts to support Ukraine and uphold European security. Indeed, our deep defence relationship under the Lancaster House treaties has enabled us to convene the Coalition of the Willing, sustaining long-term support for Ukraine and preparing conditions for a just and lasting peace. Last week, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, co-chaired a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing with President Macron in Paris. Alongside President Zelensky, they signed a declaration of intent on deploying forces to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal, paving the way for a legal framework for British, French and partner forces to operate on Ukrainian soil, to secure Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerate its armed forces. The Paris Declaration, agreed with the US and others, sets out guarantees to be activated once a ceasefire comes into force. My colleague, the Minister for Europe, is in regular contact with his counterpart. They met last month in Vienna and in London last October ahead of the Berlin Process Summit. The Foreign Secretary visited her counterpart in Paris last October, and they are in regular touch. Last July's state visit by President Macron marked the renewal of our shared bonds at every level of government. As part of that visit, at the 37th UK-France Summit, President Macron and the Prime Minister strengthened our partnership with groundbreaking agreements covering migration, defence, growth and culture. The Lancaster House 2.0 declaration will accelerate our bilateral defence and security cooperation to new levels and strengthen Europe's contribution to NATO. We agreed to overhaul the Combined Joint Expeditionary Force to refocus it on the Euro-Atlantic area and to address evolving security threats. We reaffirmed our commitment to nuclear cooperation through the Northwood Declaration, an important declaration stating that our nuclear forces are independent but can be coordinated. The new UK-France Nuclear Steering Group met in December to coordinate work across nuclear policy, capabilities and operations. At the summit, the Prime Minister and the President also committed to strengthening cooperation on illegal migration and tackling the criminal gangs responsible for the small boat crossings that have cost so many lives and I know has been an important part of my honourable friend's activities in Parliament. France is also a key part of our growth and energy security. I won't dwell on the important and vital investments that EDF have made in Sizewell Seas. They've been covered so effectively by my honourable friend. My other honourable friend, my former colleague in the Foreign Office, it covered the important cultural and educational cooperation opportunities between our two countries. The exchange of the biotapestry and the Sutton Hoo treasures is a real celebration of our joint history. Our reassociation to Erasmus Plus in 2027 creates new opportunities for young people in exactly the way my honourable friend described. In conclusion, Chair, across this government will continue to strengthen the bonds between our countries and our people in our many areas of shared ambition and cooperation. Through our co-leadership of the Coalition of the Willing, the UK and France will continue to provide global leadership in an era of renewed instability.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered UK relations with France. As many of their opinions say aye. Aye. For the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. The sitting is suspended till 4:30. Thank you.